Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for attending our community night. We are very excited to showcase some of the amazing work that our students have been doing. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gavin Roddy. I'm the principal at Berkshire Elementary School. We were going to start tonight with some musical entertainment from Joseph Bentley, followed by Martin Rivera. So without further ado, I was actually going to turn it over to Mr. Joseph Bentley. Did you want to share with us what you're playing tonight?
Ghost Waltz.
Ghost Waltz? Perfect. Thank you so much. Whenever you are ready, my friend. So next up, I would like to invite Martin Rivera to perform his piece. And Martin, what will you be playing today? Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Perfect.
All right, close enough for jazz.
Thank you so much, Martin. Can we give both of them just one more round of applause? So next up, I have a real treat for you. I am going to invite Miss Sadie Durain, our first grade teacher, and she will be having her first graders come up to this section right over here in the cafeteria in order to recite Brown Bear, What Do You See?
I see a red bird looking at me. 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 I
a black sheep, a goldfish, and the teacher looking at us. That's what we see.
First grade, come on back really quickly. All right, I would like all of you guys at the count of 3 to take a big, huge bow. 1, 2, 3. Woo! So for the next presentation, I'm very, very excited for this. If anyone in 2nd grade who has joined us tonight, if you could please stand for us for a moment. And so I'm so excited that our 2nd grade came out today because what we are going to be showing now is a video. This was a video that was made this past, when was the 14th?
Last Friday.
Friday. Oh my gosh, wow, I really need to look at a calendar. So this past Friday, the students were given a prompt, and it was, what is love? And actually over on this table, we actually have copies of a booklet that their contributions went into, where each 2nd grade student asked, what is love? And so Miss Joyle, who cannot be with us tonight, went ahead and also created a video to share with the community, which we'd like to play right now for you.
Love is when you love somebody so much. Helping your family. Love is where you be kind to others, you be respectful and helpful. Love is when you miss somebody and you love somebody.
Taking care of your parents and helping them.
Love is when you do not want to leave someone. Love is where you spend time with your family.
Love is how you love your parents and other people.
Love is something that you love, like your dad or your mom. Love is something you miss, like Papa. He is in Florida, so my baby and my Grammy. But my Grammy is in heaven. I think love is caring for people, caring for pets, and I think it means something someone must do or love someone, and I love my family. Love is for people that love people and be kind for people.
Love is when you are kind, responsible, and happy.
Helping them, being kind to them, and when you care about someone, you're kind to someone and you want to spend time with that person, and you don't want them to go because you go on one day and then you be sad because you love that person and you'll remember that person forever. Love is, well, if you love someone, you don't want to leave them because they're being kind to you and you don't want to do anything mean to them.
Hugs and support and love.
Love is when, showing love is when you hug them and you care about them. When someone needs help, you help them.
Helping them and doing stuff for them.
You can hug them and help them good if they're hurt. How you show people is love is how if you help them up when they're sad or excited, but when love When love is around, you help people a lot. How you show people is love is how if you help them up when they're sad or excited, but when love is around, you help people a lot. Is where you help other people and you be nice for them for the whole Valentine's Day and you give them treats and other things. When you show people that you love them. Love is, how you show love is if you hug someone and then if you know your friends, then they would ask if they want to play with you at recess. Caring for others. By showing kindness. Love is kindness. Love is when you spread it, is when you have joy and is nice and kind and are happy. If you want to spread love in the world, don't be mean. Show somebody that how to care for someone that used to be mean. How you spread love in the world is caring about other people and missing them when they're gone. Helping others when they need it and being kind to others. You send cards all across the world to other states and countries. Being kind to others and helping the community. How to spread love. Help somebody when they're hurt and help them up. And I would like helping people because it's kind and I just like helping people because I like being kind and I say, do you want to play with me? And they say yes or no, and if they say no, I say it's okay. I could play somewhere else. When someone gets hurt, you want to help them and you don't want to be mean and throw them back on the ground and then someone else would have to come back and then they would say just don't play with that kid because he's being a bully.
And if all of those who participated in second grade could stand up and take a bow. Thank you so much. And now there's two other things I did want to showcase. I know that I had mentioned this a little bit earlier today for some of you who initially arrived. You'll notice that there are some trifolds in the corner over here. These were created by our sixth grade class in global citizenship. Each student chose a country to research and showcase. And these trifolds will actually be a part of our upcoming Winterlude event this Friday, which I'll be talking about in just another moment. I also wanted to draw your attention over to the mural that was made by our LEAPS program, just showcasing some of the wonderful things that they've been able to do throughout the school year as well. And on that regard, I'd also like to extend a special warm welcome to Heather Moore, the director of LEAPS. She is, let's give her a round of applause. So then, for those of you, I'm going to talk just very, very briefly about some of the current things that are happening at Berkshire. If at this point or onward, you wanted to continue to watch, however your students were feeling a little restless, she will be in the classroom right across the hallway from the cafeteria where students will be engaging in some games as well and are welcome at any point to join her in that room. I'm sorry?
Team helper there too. Layla will be there.
Oh, perfect. Thank you guys so much. So then, in terms of what's happening at Berkshire, I wanted just to take a few moments just to look at some of the goals that we have set, as well as our progress towards those goals. One of the biggest things we started off this year is we wanted to have some very clear goals to help, once again, our students grow and to help our community grow. And so one of our main goals was, of course, increased academic proficiency in all subjects with particular focus for literacy and math. And so some of the things that has informed that work, or that goal has informed the work of, is we've been renewing our efforts to make sure that we are collecting reliable student proficiency data, whether it's in terms of reading, whether it's in terms of mathematical ability, whether it's in terms of global citizenship, science, even our unified arts. We have found ways to continue to collect data regularly to help inform our instruction and identify what areas our students are succeeding and what areas our students need additional supports and growth. In addition to that, we've vastly increased the number of times that we're providing observations and coaching in real time. One of the great things that I've been very proud of this year is just the sheer amount of time that I've been able to spend in the classroom working with teachers and helping to support instruction. And that, of course, is practice typically makes the best teacher. We've also found ways to provide more responsive and informed interventions. Once again, when we see those students who might need that extra support, who might need that, or those students who might need that extra enrichment, we've been honing the ways that we're tracking that data to make sure that we're responding in a timely manner to support our students' diverse needs. And then finally, we've rolled out either new curriculum or curriculum that has been updated, including our Bridges program, which is in a new revised version, as well as our new literacy programs, My View for kinder through 5th grade and Amplify for 6th through 8th grade. Another one of the goals that we named was increased social emotional proficiency. So those, a lot of times you'll hear people talk behaviors. Well, behaviors are a learned skill as well that need to be taught explicitly. And so the work we've done with that is I've worked very closely with our wonderful behavior support team and also with a wonderful addition to our community, Miss Erin Paquette, our assistant principal. She cannot be here tonight. However, we put a lot of effort towards revising our family handbooks that went out this past year to really make sure that we were clarifying what our goals were and how we were going to support our students. We've also put a great deal of effort into making sure that we're holding ourselves accountable with implementing restorative practices. That means not just expecting to discipline or punish behaviors, but actually really work with the students to help make any kind of behavior incident a learning experience for them and a way for us to identify, what skills do we need to continue to target to support those students. And then finally, once again, just like with academics, making sure we're being responsive and making sure that our interventions to support students' social emotional well-being is responsive and timely as well. So then progress towards our goals. This was something that I was pleased to share with the board at our last board meeting. In terms of our academic ways, or our academic goals, once again, we've increased the ways that we are tracking student learning, and our STAR data has shown an increase in student proficiency categories for both math and reading. Now, one of the things is, we are still halfway through the year, but we're going to continue with fidelity to track student learning and use that to inform our instruction and to form our intervention to help support student needs. And then our progress towards our behavior goals. So last year, at the time that I presented it, which would have been the end of January, we had 962 planning room referrals. This year, we've brought that down to 607 planning room referrals. So once again, that is showing that that's less time or fewer times when students are being sent out of the classroom. That means increased instructional time. And that means, once again, to us at least, it's an early indicator that the practices that we're using are working. In addition to that, last year we had 267 administrative referrals. Now that was at the end of the year, not by the midpoint. When we last tracked it, we were at 115, and I can tell you, since we last tracked it, that number has not changed by more than 2 additional referrals. And so these were referrals where it was something that involved an administrator actually having to step in and address as well. And so once again, we're seeing with this, we are on track to once again reduce that total number as well. I think though more impressive has been the implementation of our new SEL curriculum, or social emotional learning curriculum, including 2 programs, responsive classrooms and developmental designs, which we've used largely to inform our morning advisory meetings. And these are ways that we can build community among the classroom students through games and through shared team building to really build that camaraderie and build that sense of community. And then finally, we've increased our community building events. This has included increased number of PBIS celebrations, which is, once again, is when we're tracking positive behavior, the students can work towards a celebration every month once they meet their goal. The most recent one was the final day of our December before our first winter break, where we had a winter carnival because of the hard work that the students were showing. We've also implemented the Roadrunner of the Month, which is a chance to recognize those students in the K2, 3-5, and 6-8 band who are showing exemplary character. We have just recently rolled out a youth advisory committee, which is a very exciting development because that is now basically giving the power back to the students from 5th through 8th grade to help inform us what is the experience of being a student at Berkshire like, and what can we do to hear their voice and implement those positive changes. And as a matter of fact, we had our most recent meeting today, and it was a really open and honest discussion where students were able to share, these are the things we like, these are the things that are going well at Berkshire, but these are the things, Mr. Roddy, that aren't going well at Berkshire that we as a community need to do a better job of improving. And then finally, community events, assemblies, and field trips. We've been able to increase that number as well, and we're going to continue to once again find fun and engaging ways to help students feel a sense of ownership. We don't want them to come into the building just thinking, I am here to learn. Of course, that's the primary reason, but we also want them to feel that this is a safe place that they are a part of as well. And so next steps. Here are a couple of things that are on our agenda. The first one you've probably already heard about, and that is Winterlude, which is a celebration of community and winter. Winterlude is going to be this Friday. It is going to be an all-day event. And the reason why we wanted to roll this out was because we realized the Aries are a tough time. And by Aries, I mean January and February. I can even show you my chapped hands to show you just how tough those are. They are the darkest, coldest months. It's typically after that sort of that post-holiday hangover, so to speak, where it can oftentimes feel just like, I think someone said it best, January feels like it is 45 days long. And honestly, February is the shortest month, but it sure does not feel like it does it. And so we wanted to find a way to really renew our community bonds, because this is the time when we're all feeling stress. And this is the time when we're all feeling a little bit of that burnout, whether it's students, teachers, parents. We're all feeling a little bit of that, like, ugh, when is this winter going to be over? I just want it to be summer already. And so we're going to do a couple of different things to help celebrate, and I'm hoping that this will become an ongoing tradition. We are going to have visitors from the Abenaki tribe who are going to showcase some different winter traditions that the tribe has, including snow snakes and an Abenaki drumming ritual. In addition to that, we're going to have cultural presentations, such as our cultural crosswalk, where we're going to showcase the hard work that our 6th graders have been doing. We're also going to have guest presenters from different cultures, including one member of our community who had a very unique life growing up on the West Coast on a houseboat, to one of our teachers who is from the Philippines, who's going to present what her life in the Philippines is like. And I can tell you, this was the first time she ever saw snow. After the first week in December, she's like, it's so beautiful. And then I checked in with her that following Monday. I was like, how do you like it? And she's like, I want it to go away now. And I was like, ooh, wow. Well then, don't know what to tell you there. Also, I'm a little biased to this final presenter. My wife is also going to be presenting because she grew up in Hungary. And in Hungary growing up, she actually experienced what Winterlude was like in continental Europe firsthand. And so she's going to talk about some of the European rituals as well. One of the biggest things Winterlude is Winterlude is a lot of communities around the world sort of pick that coldest, darkest, snowiest time of the year to celebrate. But also there is a tradition that we're going to end with on Friday, which is, there's actually 2 traditions. The first one is you end Winterlude by putting on masks that you've made, going outside and scaring off the winter. In addition to that, and this is one that gave my superintendent a little bit of high blood pressure, there was an additional tradition where you jump over a bonfire. which we're going to, of course, be implementing with fidelity. We are actually going to be making a replica bonfire. Do not worry, no one is going to get burned, except me. I just have a knack for that. We're going to actually have a replica bonfire that students are going to jump all over as well. And it's kind of like jumping over a threshold from winter to spring. So it's a way to celebrate the winter, but it's also a way to send it off as well. I already know, yes, we're going to get more snow in March. I know it's not going to actually scare it off fully, but it's always a fun way to just sort of welcome in that changing of the seasons. The other thing that's going to be rolling out before this spring is going to be something that I have wanted to do for a while, and that is revising our vision and mission statements. And it's just time. I don't think the last time, Ms. Coda, when you were principal of Berkshire, you had gone through revising the vision and mission statements. How long ago was that?
Well, I started 19 years ago.
So-
So I would say probably in looking at Mrs. Larrabee, Mr. Ho, 15 years, or 16 probably.
So it's been a long time, and generally with vision and mission statements, you want to revise those every few years. It's a way to just continue to keep focus with the community. It's a way for the community to continue to revisit. And by community, I mean teachers, students, families, community members. It's a way to really review what we stand for, what we believe, and refresh that and recommit to that as well. So I will be sending out surveys and scheduling meetings for that later this year as well. Without further ado, I want to thank you guys once again for coming out to hear some of the amazing things that are happening in the school. And I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Coda and Mr. Daybell to present a little bit about the budget. Also, one final thing I did want to let you guys know, you probably noticed a very short little man who looked very suspiciously like me. That is my son, Alexander Roddy. He was being very zealous in passing out the sign-in sheet. If you did not get a chance to sign it, please make sure to do so. It'll be over at this desk over here. Thank you guys so much.
All right, so we will go ahead and get started. I'm Ms. Coda, I'm the superintendent for Franklin Northeast. I spent a lot of time in this building. This is a near and dear space for me. I worked in this building for 14 years as an instructional coach, an assistant principal, and then a principal. So it's wonderful being back here. It is, had a lot of really good times here. I'll tell you a little bit about myself before I get started. So I'm actually someone who grew up in Franklin Northeast in these communities. I went to school at Berkshire Elementary State. All of my children are products of our FNASU school system. I've attended schools here, and I now I'm a proud grandmother of a preschooler in one of our schools. So what happens in these schools is deeply personal to me, and we're working hard to really make some great experiences for our students. So I'm thankful, this is our 4th budget meeting, and this is the first one I've been able to do with my business manager. I'm very happy about that. Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Morgan Daybell. I've been in this role for about a dozen years. Prior to that, I was a school board member in Montgomery, and one of the first major things I did as business manager was the expansion project here at Berkshire Elementary with Ms. Coda and some of the board members who are in the audience, or former board members who are in the audience.
Okay, so I'm going to start. There are annual reports that are here on tables. If you don't have one, they're right over here by Mr. and Mrs. Elander. So please feel free to grab one. Those should also land in your mailboxes at some point this week. Did somebody just say they got it?
No,
Later this week.
they were dropped off today.
Oh, fantastic. So students, we hope. So one of the things I'll just point to, we have a celebrations page in there, just a few that are specific to our NMV schools. In NMV, we're proud that we have one of our elementary teachers of the year, or not one of, our elementary teacher of the year, Christopher Comstock, who is the music teacher at Sheldon Elementary in the top right. We also had the Above and Beyond Award go to one of our educators, the receptionist, administrative assistant at Bakersfield Elementary received that award. And we have some students who have been honored with some pretty big awards. Berkshire graduates Michaela Shadman received the Vermont Presidential Scholar Award recently, and Marshall Moffitt, who was also a Berkshire graduate, Richford graduate, both are Richford students. Marshall just received the, I'm gonna read it so we can get it right. He was one of 2 young Vermont people to receive the John Lewis Leadership Award for his commitment to social justice, equity, and inclusion. Marshall's a remarkable young man. And here, Carter and Jesse, these are students not in NMD, but they're students in our Career and Technical Center, and they've done very, very well at the state level. Carter's won a gold medal in Skills USA. And then we've got Jessie, who has been an officer in the FFA club at the state level.
Excuse me, Missy, Jessie was also a Berkshire student.
She was way back, wasn't she? Thank you for reminding me of that. We also had 4 state championships in FMSU this past year, so we have a lot to celebrate. On this slide, I have a pointer, but it doesn't work very well. Maybe I just not the right place. I'll point with my hand and things like this. So I wanted to take a moment to give you a little bit of data. You hear our principals talking about data at our school board meetings. If you're tuning into those school board meetings, we're very data driven at this point, and one of the things that we're using to measure our progress in literacy. Literacy is one of the big goals that we're working on across all of FNESU. So we use what's called the STAR literacy assessment to measure where students are when they enter at the beginning of the year. They take it again at mid-year in January, and then they take it again in the spring. So what we're looking for is growth over time. So students that are in green are at or above what the standard is. Yellow, they're just below, so they're kind of what we call on watch. If they're in this darker orange color, those are students that we would put into intervention, and if they're in red, that's more urgent intervention. So we want to see these colors at the bottom shrink over time. So we can see, I'm going to skip first grade and come back to that because there's some test of regularity that Leah might help me describe in a minute. Let's start with 2nd grade here. So the first line is 2nd grade fall, and then 2nd grade winter. So you can see our green is growing, the yellow, the gold is shrinking. This is 3rd grade fall, 3rd grade winter, and so on all the way through 12th grade. In 1st grade, I'll take a crack at it and you tell me if I'm close. So 1st grade, when they enter 1st grade, they take the early literacy assessment from STAR. And as students develop their literacy skills, they can move into the STAR literacy, not the early literacy, but the STAR literacy. So some students moved from the fall, they were in early literacy, and now they're taking STAR literacy. So these two, you can't really compare them because students were taking 2 different tests in a couple of ways. You want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job. It's really about the probability of them as readers. So as students develop skills, the assessment's geared more towards those early skills that students learn. So understanding letters and sounds as opposed to being able to read at the word level. So what we have been able to celebrate is that we have more students ready to now take that harder assessment or that more rigorous assessment because their skills are there versus an early literacy is designed to really look at those basic skills that they would have to acquire before they're able to read at the word level. So even though it looks like we may not have as many proficient in 1st grade, we have more students now able to take that assessment in 1st grade than what we were seeing in the past. So it's kind of disproportionate in that way, but it's a movement in the right direction.
What would you say the percentage shift is you thinking like what percentage before now? Is it a couple points?
Since the fall, there's been 33% more of our first graders able to take the reading assessment. So that's only just because I've been living in the data, it's not that I.
Can you introduce yourself, Leah, and say what you do?
Absolutely. So I'm Leah Belitzos. I'm the Assistant Director of Instruction and Learning for Franklin Northeast. So I work alongside Gabrielle Lumbra in developing the curriculum that we utilize. And so this is a big year for us because we've adopted a different literacy program to help us reach our priority standards. So it's a really exciting year.
The second visual represents STAR math assessments. So we're seeing some really good growth. We've been targeting math for many years. And it's the same idea, is that the first two lines are first grade and second grade. So again, you want to see more green and less of the other colors as you shift over. And you can see when you look at the grade levels next to one another across the board in almost every level, we've made some pretty good progress with those students, and we look forward to celebrating even more growth by the time we get to the end of the school year. So I had someone say to me last year when we had one of these annual meetings, you know, someone in the room didn't know what Northern Mountain Valley Unified Union School District meant. So I want to just say that back several years ago, we had individual town districts and they were merged under a state board of education order. You might remember the term Act 46 when they consolidated districts in the state. So these four, they used to be town districts, were merged together into the Northern Mountain Valley Unified Union District. They fall under the Franklin Northeast Supervisory Union. We have the Northern Mountain Valley, and we have the Enosburg-Richford District. So in your district, in the budget that you see when you go to the polls, what you're investing in are these four schools: Bakersfield, Berkshire, Montgomery, and Sheldon. There are 4 pre-K through 8 buildings, and we are educating 828 students across those 4 buildings. Those are students that we educate in pre-K 8, and then we tuition to high school, and we'll talk more about that later once we get into 9-12.
There will also be more detailed enrollment in your annual report and in the school reports, individual school reports that are linked, as well as on the FNASU website, which has a much deeper dive into the numbers that go into developing the budget. So I encourage people to go there, and we'll go through them pretty quickly here. On this, and Courtney, you go to the next graph. What we're showing are 4 elementary schools in NMV. From 2020 to 24, this is the actual enrollment. So kids who are in seats on October 1st each year. And then from 25 out to 29 are our projections on where those populations are going. We try to keep that in mind as we shift staffing between the buildings or from one building to another. You'll note that so there are 4. Sheldon Elementary is top, Berkshire is this line in green, Montgomery is in blue, and then there's a line in red here at the bottom. It's Bakersfield Elementary. It'll be easier to see when you have the report in front of you. The important takeaway here is that for all of our schools, as we project out to 2029, we are still anticipating at least steady state, in some cases some moderate growth going forward. That is a very different narrative than is happening in a lot of other parts of the state. Other than really Franklin County and Chittenden County, most regions of the state are seeing a loss in terms of their overall population and their student population.
How do you base your projections on?
So what I do is I look at the last few years of, we had 8 first graders in Montgomery, and the next year, when I look at them in second graders, we have 9. I say there's been a little bit of increase there. And we kind of look at that over all the schools. So over the last 3 years, you know, those first graders, 3 years down the road, how many of them were there for 4th grade? Or how many kids were from 4th grade? And then I look at birth data from a few years prior to that and say, okay, if we had 10 kids who were born this year and I would have expected 10 to be in kindergarten, but there were 12, then I'm going to anticipate that there's growth there. So that's from year to year. At your annual meeting, all voting is now done on town meeting day. That was a change from last year. We've got a series of articles that you'll be asked to vote on. The first three are for people. Article 1 is to elect a moderator. Article 2 is to elect a district clerk. Currently, there's nobody who's filed to run as moderator. It's a position that only comes up if we have an in-person meeting, which is in this day and age pretty rare. The district clerk is responsible for kind of maintaining the district checklist. Emily Fecto, who's also your town clerk, is running for that. We also have 3 board seats that are up this year. One is for a 3-year term for a resident from Bakersfield. Even though the person who's running is from Bakersfield, everybody in the district gets to vote on all of those seats. So you're able to vote for all 3 of these in Berkshire. That person's name is Audrey Shea. In Montgomery, we have a woman named Michelle Schapp who's running to fill a vacancy that was created this year when a board member stepped down. She's from Montgomery. And then there's a 3rd seat in Montgomery, a 3-year seat that Mary Niles, the current board chair, is running for re-election. You will have an opportunity to write candidates in all of those. For the clerk and the 3 board seats, there are candidates on the ballot.
And did you say we're voting on that day of the meeting now?
It's on town meeting day is the official vote date. You can vote early, but it's a vote at your town clerk's by ballot, and we'll go over the voting at the end.
How do you, if you were interested in running, how would that process go?
So there's a deadline, sometime in early February? Or
Late January.
Late January. So if you're interested, you have to meet the deadline and you have to submit a petition that essentially says which seat you're running for and have at least 30 signatures, I believe, in order to get on to that.
What happens if you, like you'd have now, a position that no one's running for? How does that get filled?
People could do a write-in. So if you have, I think it's probably 30 people who write your name in, and you got the most votes, you can be the moderator. So you have to get the most votes is the first gate, and if it's a write-in, there's a certain minimum, and I think it's 30. And then for future seats, we start the budgeting process in September at the board meetings, and at those board meetings, I'm going to constantly reminding people who are the seats that are up for the next year. And I would assume that next year we're going to have Berkshire and Sheldon seats up, but I don't know that off the top of my head. The next article is the article to pass the budget. This is the one that gives the school board authority to spend money on behalf of the students in NMV. This first sentence is explaining what the budget is. It's about $24 million for NMV. The second sentence is back again this year, and it compares the per pupil education spending, so how much we're spending per kid, and compares that to the year prior. We'll go into this and why this number is a little squishy later on in the presentation. The per pupil spending is 10.6% higher. The actual budget itself is only up about 8%. And I think in the next slide, we'll start to talk about where those increases are. Farther down the line, we'll talk about where those increases are. Article 5 on the town meeting warning is the board asking for authority to take some of the money that was left over at the end of 2024 and put it into a capital reserve fund. Those capital reserve funds are the ones that we use to repair buildings where we have a major project. For example, in Berkshire, the boilers are probably 35, 40 years old and they're limping along, and so we're going out and getting bids to do that work, hopefully over the summer. We would use capital reserve funds for that if we need to.
If that is not approved, where does the funds go?
So the funds would then go into buying down the tax rate, and if you keep that number in mind and that's half of what's left over when we get to the tax rate, just remind me and I'll point out what that impact would be.
So if you don't mind, I'll jump in here and talk about some of the major drivers that we saw in budget decisions this year. So one of the things that cost this district quite a lot of the money that we put into your budget is paying for high school tuition for your 9th through 12th grade students. So we're in a situation this year where we're graduating a class of students that's smaller in 12th grade than the number of students that we're sending off in 8th grade. So we're sending off 82 8th graders and 67 is the number that we had budgeted for seniors. So it is, when you take that in addition to increases in high school tuition rates across the board, we're expecting the secondary tuition to be up almost $923,000 over last year. So that was a huge driver in our budget from last year to this year. We're also in negotiations. We finished negotiation with our support staff after this year's budget was approved. So we built a projection in, and then we know what the actual settlement was, so that impacted this budget. And we're also in a position right now where we're negotiating with both teachers and support staff for future years. So in this budget, we put in almost $600,000 into expected salary and personnel costs. What we've seen at the state level is the health insurance has been a driver for several years. We've had double-digit premium increases across the board. This year we have 12.6% increase in health insurance, and the premiums alone are driving this budget up by a little over $250,000. We also have, in this school specifically, we tested positive for PCBs under the state testing plan. So we have 2 classrooms upstairs that we have not been able to use since Gavin was hired as principal, so it's been 2 full school years. The state set aside money to help schools that were identified to remediate when you tested positive for PCBs. That money has already run out, and there are a lot of schools in the waiting list for if new money becomes available through the legislature. So we are working with a consultant to see if we can move forward with mitigating those classrooms and getting the PCB levels, taking care of the PCB contamination and getting those classrooms back into play. It's a slow process. We've been working towards getting some of those approvals. Those will likely be expenses that we'll use some of the capital reserve money to take care of. So to your point about the $52,000, that would be a resource for us to take care of the PCB mitigation. What we know is that we have to make sure all of our T's are crossed and our I's are dotted, because if future money becomes available for PCBs, we still could be eligible, but in a reimbursement kind of mode. So that's like the latest within the last few days about PCBs. We don't actually have anything budgeted for PCB, so we would be looking for the capital reserve.
And this just shows those increases. Just mentioned, high school tuition makes up about half of the increase to the budget. The staff salaries is another third. Health insurance, a little bit less. And then this 4.8% is everything else. So to the extent that utilities are anticipated to go up, or we think that supplies are going to cost more next year, we want to add more to field trips or to athletics. All of that increases on this tiny piece of the pie.
Is there a final level of approval at the state level that would be the final step to approve this budget? Say it's approved at the district level, the town level. Is there another level above that at the state level that would be a final approval of our budget?
Not under this current funding system. We're going to go into some proposed changes to the funding system at the end. And if I haven't answered your question about where that could go, we'll push on you there.
Yeah, I guess another way to say my question is if it's approved at the local level,
Yeah.
is that it? It's approved, doesn't require any other state level?
The way the system works now is taxpayers, school boards have the authority to build the budgets, and I'm gonna come right back to you guys. The school boards build the budgets, taxpayers approve the budgets, and then we let the state know,
Yeah.
this is how much money we have approved by our taxpayers in order to operate our schools. And then the state takes that from every district in the state and they say, okay, this is how much money it's going to cost us to fund our schools. And so then they look at the revenue side and determine what they need to, like actually they'll change the dollar yield in the formula based on whatever that total is, and they'll determine what the ending tax rate needs to be in order to generate that much money to pay out other revenue sources that play into that too. But you get the total say about the budget under this current system. That is likely changing now.
Thank you.
What is the high school tuition comprised of? What does that represent?
So every 9th through 12th grader in this district has school choice, and so most of the kids in Berkshire are going either to Enosburg or to Richford High School. We have a handful that go to St. Johnsbury, a couple here and there. We don't control those budgets, so for public schools, they send us a bill for the cost. We pay that bill. For the private schools, they send us a bill. For St. J, we pay their cost. For places like Stansted in Quebec or places out of state, we would pay the average Vermont announced high school tuition. But you as voters and the board and us writing the checks don't really have any control over those figures unless we wanted to, by a district vote, say we're gonna send all our kids to this high school.
So, so you get the numbers from the high schools, and you've already baked in all of the elementary schools somewhere else? I guess I'm the word tuition is throwing me off. I'm thinking of a college tuition you pay. Mm-hmm. So you're not paying, the school isn't paying, the students aren't paying the tuition. So the district is paying the school by students, is that?
Correct.
Okay.
So we get a calculation of how many students are attending Enosburg High School.
Mm-hmm.
We know what that tuition rate is, so we have to write a check from the Northern Mountain Valley District to the Enosburg Richford District. We also get bills from Maple Run, MBU, North Country, St. Johnsbury. There are several places that our students attend, and we have to pay the tuition for all of those schools.
So then the teacher and staff salaries and other expenses are the elementary school side?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Everything else reflected except the high school tuition is the elementary part of the budget. So we did make some staffing changes. There is quite a lot of pressure around school budgets around the state of Vermont. If you're turning your news on at all, I bet you're hearing about this. It's kind of everywhere in the media, and I'll talk about the governor's proposal for education reform at the end. As a superintendent, I am sitting in on a lot of trainings, and as is Morgan, talking about right sizing our education system, talking about how many students should you have in your class, how many teachers should you have in your school, how many administrators, like getting to a ratio that is higher than what we currently have. They're also talking about, when you think about high school offerings and even elementary offerings, making sure that we don't have these ultra small classes that we sometimes contend with. So they're really using this term staffing with precision. So if you are looking at hiring an art teacher, by way of example, they ask you to think about how many sections do you have, how many sections can you do in a day, how many students, and then you're trying to figure out how much of an art teacher do you need, and then can you work with other schools to have a part of a person in this school and a part of a person in this school. Mr. Hull is a great example of that. Here at FNESU, we've been doing that for years with a lot of people. Eric spends half of his time here, and is it half and half?
It's
0.6 and 0.4, right?
3-2, yeah.
So 3 days here, 2 days in Montgomery, and he's been doing that for at least 20 years. So this year we had some changes in the budget. We have an overall reduction of 4.4, where it says FTE, that just means full-time staff members. So we had a decrease of 5 paraeducators. So down 2 in Bakersfield, 1 in Berkshire, 1 in Montgomery, and 1 in Sheldon. And those were not people that have been laid off, that has been through attrition. So as people are leaving, we're really looking deeply at students' IEPs and looking at the exact amount of services that are written into those IEPs and trying to be really precise with the number of paraeducators we have working in our buildings. And if we are covering our services, we're not refilling positions. So that's why you've seen some adjustments there. We also increased by 0.6, so 3 days a week of a teacher. So that is the addition of a STEAM teacher. So science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. So that's a teacher who will spend part of their time in Bakersfield, part of their time in Berkshire, and part of their time in Montgomery. This board last year approved a STEAM teacher for Sheldon. That had to do with the number of students that they were serving and needing to have another elective. And that position has gone very, very well. Kids are doing some really incredible design things, working with 3D printers and doing all sorts of products in their library with a STEM position in the classrooms, and making some really big connections. So we're excited about that potential to have someone do something similar in the other 3 schools. We took a half of a health teacher out of the Sheldon budget, and that assignment has been shifted to another person, and we added a 3-day-a-week art teacher here in Berkshire.
Now we get to leave all those boring words and talk about exciting numbers. I'll do a quick walkthrough on how tax rates are set. There again is a lot more detail on our website. You can download different forms that really give you the background on each of these. We start here, and this is the number that we're asking the voters to approve in terms of the spending plan for the district. We think that we're going to get about $89,000, combination of grants from the state, maybe interest, maybe some little private grants that come in. That $51,000 is the other half that we talked about earlier, that money left over from 2024. The board's proposing putting half of that into buying down your tax rate. So the money we spend, less the money that we think is coming in, less the money that we have in the bank, gives this $24.1 million figure. That's what's called education spending, and that's what we send to the state once a budget is passed and say, we need you to send us this money so we can run our schools for the next year. The state then needs to come up with a tax rate for us. So they take that 24 million in education spending, and they divide it by the number of, it's called long-term weighted ADM. It's a count of the kids in our district, and some kids are given more weight than others. So the state knows that it costs more to educate a high school kid than an elementary school kid. It costs more to educate a kid who doesn't hear English at home than one who does. Kids who live in poverty cost more than kids who don't. And so we don't have over 2,000 kids in our district, but we get to count 2,000 kids because of the demographics of our region. You take the education spending divided by that kid count, and you get that per pupil spending amount. That's the other number that's on Article 4 on the ballot. And we'll talk about that and where we fall compared to the rest of the state a little bit later. That number is divided by what's called the yield, which is a number set by the legislature. It's a number that's just made up so that they raise enough money statewide. And doing that gets you a district level tax rate, so $1.37 in this case. So again, what we spend, which is controlled by the board and the voters, divided by the number of kids, which is a number that we get from the state, divided by the yield, which is a number that's set by the legislature, gets you a district-wide tax rate. So that's a tax rate applied across all 4 towns. Yeah.
Why is there 2 25 budgets? Is that this current year or an end year?
This is 24
Uh-huh.
and 25, and then this would be 26.
Okay, so this year's considered 25.
The year that we're in is
Okay.
25.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sure.
So town meeting day is coming up and town voting day is coming up. We'll be voting on the budget. This is a component of the town's budget. Will it be broken down, 24 million plus or minus, will it be broken down by town? In each of the 4 towns that make up this district?
You don't pay just, you're paying as a whole district. And so your tax rates though will vary by town.
Yeah,
And he's about to get to that piece of it.
okay.
But the budget overall, it is not 4 different budgets. We build one merged budget.
So on March 4th, when we vote, we'll be voting on that tax rate?
So you'll be voting on this, this 24 million number. The tax rate is a number that we're projecting now, but we've got a long way to go with the legislative session. So this yield number could end up moving up or down depending on what they want to do with it. And so, you know, we can't say what the final rate is going to be. You're gonna give us authority at some point to spend a certain amount of money.
So the 24 million, will that appear on something that we see on March 4th?
We showed you
On
that.
that paper ballot.
Warning language that we projected a few slides ago is exactly what you see on that paper ballot.
Right, okay. So that is a 10.6% increase, I think, from current year. I think
It's
that's what you said.
Yeah, it's an 8.8% roughly increase, budget to budget. The 10% is this change in per pupil spending. So you'll see this current year, we were able to count almost 2,100 students. We're about 35 students lower. That is primarily due to a change in how poverty is being counted in the state. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we're losing kids. We just have a smaller number that we get to count when we go to the state and say, here's what we need you to spend. Here's how many kids we have, what is our tax rate?
So it is confusing because the way the language is written on the ballot, it makes you think that the budget overall is going up 10%.
Right.
But they're doing it because they're asking us to do a percentage of change over that long-term weighted average, ADM, for the amount we're spending per pupil. And because it is confusing, and it's additionally complex because it's not apples and apples comparison, because last year, this is how you counted poverty, and this year, this is how you count poverty. So across the state, school districts are contending with some challenges about that number really being deceptive.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm sure there'll be some discussion about the increase at town meeting on March 3rd.
Well, you're only gonna vote, so you'll have an informational meeting on the Monday night for your town
Right.
budget.
That's, yeah.
There's another meeting for the NOP district we have one more in Sheldon next Monday, and then you have a more formal one in Tuesday in Montgomery. So we have 2 more options to talk about this, and that's what tonight is about. But then on town meeting day, you're just gonna vote.
Yeah, okay.
It used to be that we would have a school budget meeting and a town budget meeting on the same night, Walter. But
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago we
Right.
doing it that way, yeah.
Yeah.
So we can't do that anymore because of the merge, right?
Now that it's merged,
So now we have
yeah.
4 towns, and we can't quite do
Okay.
that.
And now we're gonna make it a little more confusing for you.
Can I ask one more question on the budget? You were talking about the increase that you're forecasting for the staff salary and benefits that you're in negotiation around. Does that include cost of living, or is it just raises, and what is that increase comprised of?
Yeah, so we don't really have a cost of living necessarily. We've got a collective bargaining agreement that's usually 1 or 2 or 3 years. It lays out how much returning teachers get each year and how much we would hire a new teacher coming into the district.
But cost of living isn't factored in?
The cost of living is something that's used by the union when they negotiate the agreement with the board. So that's definitely a factor that plays into what their proposal is, and it's a negotiation, so the board has a proposal, the teachers have a proposal, or the support staff. And there's a back and forth until you settle on something, both sides agree, and then that's what we actually project. So this is a projection because we're in negotiations.
And the other piece of that is that the current collective bargaining agreement, if a teacher goes back and gets a master's degree, they get a salary bump up. And so we're also trying to predict how many of those movements we're gonna need to pay.
No, that's okay. I was just gonna piggyback off my question because the last slide you said we lost 9 people, but then our salary and the cost is going up significantly, so how did that balance out?
So I think we overall, let me go back to
I
that
thought it
slide.
was 6.
It's reduction of 4.4 overall, so it was down 5 paras, and then it was up 0.6 of a teacher overall. So you're overall down 4.4, and most of those are paraeducator salaries. So do you want to say anything about the salary portion? So I think what you're asking is how could it be up that much? That has to do with the raises that are embedded into the collective bargaining agreement. That's not more people, it's just how much more it's going to cost.
But then it because then you're not also paying all of those health benefits and everything else, so it just seems.
Teachers have to pay grocery bills too.
Right, but I mean, it's not just the salary that you're factoring into those positions, you're also factoring in all the health benefits and everything else, so that's all those other benefits that we're not paying for those people.
So, but we do pay 80% of the health benefits
For
under,
who's left, though,
from what?
for who's left, not for those positions that are no longer positions.
So we're talking about 4 out of, I don't know if I know off the top of my head how many are on the side. Probably about 200. And so for every one of those people, remember we had to factor in our budget projection, this year's settlement with support staff, and then whatever we're projecting for next year's, because we settled after we built last year's budget. So we had to project that, we have to project where we think we'll land with support staff and where we think we'll land with teachers. And this is just an estimate at this point because we don't know where we'll actually land.
What is the enrolled student difference between the 2 past years, current year and last year, and then the estimated student enrollment for the proposed year?
So this year on October 1st, we had 839. Did you say the last 2 years?
Yeah.
We had 834 in 2023, 792 in 2022. We're projecting for October 1st of 2025, 818. So
Less than we have today.
am I reading that right?
You probably are, and it probably has to do with the big 8th grade class,
Yep.
which is coming off that list.
But in a way, that's offset because of high school tuitions are going up across the board. So we're graduating a larger group of 8th graders, replacing our outgoing 12th graders. And then I think it also bears mentioning that in case folks don't know that the health insurance piece, it's the 3rd year in a row that we've seen double-digit increases, and we don't control any of those healthcare costs. That's done at the state level. So it's completely out of our hands. So we had 16% and 13%, and then this year 12.6% each year. So it's a big driver. So for the 4 people fewer that we're employing, it's impossible for it to still, between increases in salaries and increases in insurance, which we don't control, and increases in general costs of pretty much everything from transportation to food service. That's what accounts for that increase, and why it doesn't make much of a dent to have 4 fewer people in our employ.
The other issue on health insurance, and this is more art than science, is that we have a relatively young teaching staff, and when they get 26 years old, they come onto our insurance. So in the past, they were on their parents' plan and we were not paying anything, and all of a sudden they were a big bill with that. Or they get married, or they have their first kid, and that insurance goes out. We then take, or the state takes that district-wide tax rate and has to come up with a tax rate that's fair for each of the 4 towns. So when I say fair, it's because you're paying on the listed value of your property, the amount that your town is saying your property is worth. And we know that towns reappraise at different times. They're less accurate, more accurate from one town to the next. And so the state calculation is called the common level of appraisal, which is basically a number where they're trying to see how far off from reality your town grand list is, or how different it is from the fair market value. And so you'll see here, and you'll see on the next slide, we would divide the the district tax rate by the CLA and come up with the town tax rate. So this is
Fine
the
CLA, sorry.
common level of appraisal. And again, that's the difference between listed value and fair market value. So here at Berkshire, with everything that we presented so far, we're predicting about $1.48 in terms of a tax rate. That is higher than Bakersfield, and that is lower than Montgomery, and it is higher than Sheldon. And that is because those grant lists are more and less accurate, or more or less close to fair market value. And we'll go into that, I think, in a little more understandable way in one of the next slides. Oh, well, this shows kind of the history over the last 4 years. And so Berkshire's light blue historically has been one of the lowest of the four. And you'll see from 25 to 26, both Berkshire and Montgomery and Black are going up and going from the towns with the two lowest tax rates to the towns with the two highest tax rates. And the reason for that is the property sales in those two towns. Properties are selling for much more over what they're listed compared to Sheldon and Bakersfield, which historically have been turning property at a higher value compared to their listing. And then you can start to see some of the dollar amounts. And again, this is going to be on our website, and I believe this one is in my annual report as well. We'll go down to Berkshire here. We show two ways that people pay education property tax in Vermont currently. This side is for folks who do not get any income sensitivity payments from the state. So if you have a $100,000 house, this year taxes were $1,378 for that education piece only. FY26, we're projecting them to be $1,479, or an increase of $100. If you're paying based on income, and here we're looking at a $150,000 home. Let's say your household income is $80,000. Currently, you're paying $1,624. Projecting next year, you're paying $1,680. So not as big an increase for folks who are paying on income. Maybe across the state, certainly across our district, I think it's over half the people are paying based on those. No, you would be one or the other. And in what we have on the website, there's a link to a spreadsheet that the tax department provides where you can go in and actually say, my house is worth $149,000 and my income is $67,000, and it will go through and calculate it for you.
So what is the difference? Like, how do you know who falls under what?
We don't. The state figures that out. When you file your taxes, you file a form that's called HS 144.
Property value, you're gonna pay based on.
If your income is below, I think it's $120,000, you will probably pay based on income. That the benefit caps once you get a house over $400,000, but you'll still get some benefit if you're down at that income level. And then you can skip that one because that's the other two towns and go to this one. Is another way to look at the impact of those CLAs. So in Berkshire, let's say you have a house that the town says is worth $200,000. It's probably had that on there for 10, 15 years, I'm guessing. In this current year, the state has calculated that $200,000 listed house is really worth $257,000. Looking forward to next year, they're saying that because of the way that sales are happening in Berkshire, that house is now going to be worth $298,000. And the CLA means that you're basically going to pay taxes on that $298 figure rather than the $200 figure.
That's good for us, that's equity.
It's good for you when you sell your house. It's painful when you're paying the tax bill. So you'll see from one year to the next, that $200,000, the fair market value in Berkshire went up to $41,000. Montgomery, which has the biggest increase, $54,000. Smaller increases in both Bakersfield and Sheldon because those real estate markets, for whatever reason, have kind of leveled off and property sales are more normal.
So I'm gonna talk a little bit about this. This visual over here on this side of the screen, all of those lines reflect a district in Vermont. So that represents every school district across the state. On the very bottom, this represents the lowest spending district in the state at somewhere around $8,000. At the very top, that line represents the highest spending district at around $18,000. And when I'm giving those numbers, that's based on a long-term average, just lost my word, Morgan. It's the weighted count of students, so it's what you're paying per pupil based on the weights. So when we look at that, this comparison across the state, there's a very big difference between the lowest spending and the highest spending. And if you think about what you're able to offer in terms of opportunities for your students, there's definitely an impact in that spending differential. And Vermont's constitution requires that students in the state of Vermont should have substantially equal educational opportunities. And under our current system, they really don't, because you can build a budget, and if your community doesn't support it, they can vote down the budget, and therefore you need to spend less to get your budget approved. So in the state at 10,591 for the weighted per pupil spending. The red lines here on this, and actually this right here is the bottom of this kind of pulled forward for you to see. The red lines reflect our partners in Franklin County and how we compare to their per pupil. That's for this current year that we're in, not the projected year, because we don't have everyone else's data, and those budgets are not approved. This first black line represents what the Franklin County average is. The second black line up here represents what Vermont's statewide average per pupil spending is. And again, that's for this school year.
How does the enrolled students as well as the average cost of salaries in each of these either districts or regions of the state compare to that? I mean, is there a way to see this demographic compared to town sizes or district sizes of you know what I mean? And then the average salary in that period, in that locale.
Teacher salary?
No, I mean the average income in the county, for example. Yeah.
I would say not in an easy way. That's not data that we have readily. It's probably something we could.
I think the AOE has started to put out information that will compare spending to district size, which is roughly the same as the number of kids. So they are looking at the district like ours that has however many kids it is, say 1,000. How does that compare to a district in Chittenden County that has 4,000, or a district in southern Vermont that has 500? I've not seen anything that's tied to a salary level. There is some data that's tied to poverty numbers, which might get you close to that. There seems to be a loose correlation between spending and poverty levels. It's not super tight that I've seen, but it's there.
Meaning we spend less or more?
Communities that are poor spend less per kid.
It should be the reverse, shouldn't it? The cost for children who are in poverty, don't you typically spend more because of the additional resources and Title I money?
It should cost more to educate students who live in poverty, but under our current funding system, we can spend what our communities will approve in the budget.
And when you look at this, part of that is made up with the way we're counting kids, because we're counting those kids in poverty, but I think if you looked at sort of the straight overall spending compared to actual kids, not the weighted kids, you're going to still see that trend.
What was AOE stand?
Agency of Education.
Thank you.
Sure.
No, every year we see the same map, the same graph. But we never see, does the increased spending by these other school districts result in better education outcomes? Could you put the proficiency rates for reading and math as a chart and see that those school districts that spend 50 to 60% more than us result in better reading and math proficiency scores.
Or 100% more.
Or 100% reading. If somebody's spending $20,000 a year on education and they have reading and math scores that are worse than us,
I don't know if the
It's pretty
agency
hard
has.
but isn't that really what?
Where we're at today.
I don't know if the agency has organized any data. I have not seen anything organized that way. I will tell you there's a problem with the data reporting system in the state of Vermont. It is the lag in how they report data. They just released data after we went to press on this. Like it was, it's been embargoed for months. We haven't been able to talk about it. But that's an assessment that our students took almost a full year ago. And there have been times when it's been more than a year before we've had that data. So I don't know that we could, because you see this every year, but it does change slightly every year. So I wouldn't know how to draw something out, and that's something the agency would have to pull together and then look at proficiency levels for each of those districts.
We could
Right.
see data from the recent census by county and city that would allow us to get an idea for the volume of occupants and mean income. So from a state and a school or district-wide level, there's no to taxpayers report on how well the state funding is doing to educate our students that we can access? In terms of, I know here it's like a 30% literacy rate right now. So, not literacy rate, but at or above grade level.
So can you say the question? I'm not sure I got the question part of that.
So I thought his question was really, really important, in that it to evaluate the effectiveness of the budget in the district, it would be very helpful to take a look at the spending compared to the performance of the schools on multiple factors, not just at grade level or above, but broken out by the key subjects.
And I would encourage I don't think that's a bad idea. I don't know that I have a data set necessarily that I could pull readily from the agency, but I know that there's a lot happening in legislature right now. And I know that they're bringing a lot of data into those sessions daily. So I haven't seen that show up anywhere.
Who should we reach out to?
Secretary Zoe Saunders to see if that's the Agency of Education's secretary, so you could see if she has that data set. And another thing to just keep in mind is that you also have to take a look at population of students that some of these communities are serving. Because that there is an impact in terms of proficiency level of students and what it takes to get some students across that line.
But so to also point out, the last report by Vermont's Joint Fiscal Office, as well as numerous other studies, show that the more money that you throw at education doesn't necessarily end up with better results. So
Yeah, I'm
we
not-
see this chart every year, and it's like, well, I'd be curious as to what's the high end there.
18,000?
Yeah, I'd be curious, do they have higher building costs? Do they have higher teacher salaries?
What is it helping with?
Is it helping kids? Do they have more, we heard earlier from the presentation from Berkshire, more visits in the office or disruptions in class? Do they have more things to deal with that? Do they have more student aides?
Or
Is it
just
really
more
helping the kids,
Yeah.
all that extra money?
Yeah, I think there's probably, if you look at the top 10 on there, there are gonna be 10 different answers. I
Some lower.
kind of remember where they are. In some cases, based on their location, it probably is salaries across the board are much higher. In some cases, they're running a lot of little tiny schools in their district and losing population in those. Some of them is just the wealth of the community there, the likely education level of the community.
Or a larger school with perhaps much larger, more tenured, longer-term teachers.
It could be, although one of the ones that's historically below us is one of the biggest schools in the state. So it's not really clear, there's not a real clear trend where you can say smaller schools cost more, smaller districts cost more, or richer districts pay more.
That means the agency of education isn't necessarily doing its job to taxpayers if there's no correlation that they can prove and align to in terms of spending.
So we're gonna talk a little bit about where some of those things are going. I would say that some of the things when I started talking about staffing more precisely and talking about class sizes and things like that, they're tuning into exactly what Jared's point is, that they're wanting us to be more at scale so that you can, so class sizes, you know, our class sizes, I would say in this building, and we've done the looks, 15 to 20 range is pretty average for a class size here. And one of the things that they're recommending is fourth grade and beyond class sizes of 25. And then depending on which data set they're looking at, class sizes of 15-ish in the early elementary grades. Some say that you can go up to 20, it depends. We don't know where they'll land in the legislature, but to get to that scale is to one of Jared's points. And I'm certainly, when I talk about this, I'm not advocating for you to approve a budget that puts us way up there. But I think it's important for you to understand the vast difference when you're looking at this budget compared to what some of the other communities are looking at for budgets. And some of the wealthier towns support more spending in some of those communities. So if you could go to the next slide. One of the things that we work really hard to do, one of the things that our central office holds, the people that work not in the schools as much as they do work in the schools, but the people that their home base is from my office, is we try to find ways to provide opportunities for students because we don't have a ton of funding in the local budgets to be able to add additional opportunities. So we're always seeking competitive grants, and one of the things that we've been very proud of for a long time is our LEAPS after school program. That's something that not every school in the state has. In fact, I think only about half of the schools in the state offer after school programming for their students. So we've been able to have after school program and summer programming for a really long time. And that's a competitive grant that Heather Moore, who's across the hall with people's children right now, she writes that grant for us. This last round of grants, we received $578,833. We do budget some money from our local budgets to help pay for our after school programs, but we would not be able to do what we're doing without that competitive grant. One of the things I will say about our LEAPS program is we were the only program in the state that was chosen to, we did not have to reapply. I can't remember pass through, or I can't remember the term, but we went automatically to the next funding level for 5 more years. We didn't have to go through that process because we scored so highly. And right before we printed the budget book, we got 2 more pretty large grants. So Heather got another after school and summer program grant for $232,000 over 4 years. And our grant funding for the Bakersfield summer program had expired at the end of last year. So we were like, how are we gonna do this? We don't have enough money, so we're gonna have to make some decisions around that. So because that grant money came through, it takes the pressure off, and we're able to do that. We also received a boiler grant for here in Berkshire. So our facilities director, Vern Hoover, who is in charge of all the facilities, all your physical plants across all of FNESU, he's also been seeking a lot of competitive grants, so that $200,000 we're expecting we'll probably receive a little more money towards replacing the boilers, the pellet boilers. We just did a similar project at Richford Junior High School, and it is online, and it is very close to being totally completed. We had $600,000 in competitive grants for that project. I just got a report 2 days ago that we're expected to save $66,000 annually on energy costs because of that wood boiler, and $1.3 million over 20 years. So I don't know what the projected savings over time will be here in Berkshire, but we're actively seeking ways to be able to take care of things like that out of my office. We also did an LED light project. So you can see here in this gym as an example. In nearly all but one building throughout the supervisory union, we got a grant from Efficiency Vermont that was worth almost $112,000, and we relit with more energy efficient LED lights. And we have to go back and try to find what that projected cost savings is over time, but it's quite a lot. Other grants that we received. I think I covered everything that's specific just to the NMD side. One of the things that we had an opportunity during COVID, the federal government offered what was called ESSER investment grants to schools across the country. We were very strategic with our ESSER investments and we saved quite a lot of money for the final year to do investments related to highly engaging materials and resources for students. Your students were the first to get to experience this year. I don't know if they talked about how much fun they've been having in PE class, but we have the new projector is something that we purchased 2 of those to share across the school so they travel every marking period. That's what we could afford in the grant, but we would never have that opportunity without this grant. And that's a really physical, interactive way for them to experience either their gym class or they can go and there's content for other classes that they can also practice. We also have maker spaces and have invested heavily in helping our library spaces get better tables, more comfortable seating, maker spaces, 3D printers, things like that. So when you walk into every library space, very welcoming. We want those to be spaces that kids want to go and collaborate and work and create. And across the supervisory union, we were able to do that. And that's something that without this opportunity, we would not have been able to do that. So we're very happy about that.
Next question. Is the source of most of those grant funds state or federal?
It's a combination of the two. We also, I see where you're going with that. We'll talk about. I should have talked about that previously. Yes. So if we go back to thinking about the staffing changes that we made, we have several teachers across all of our FNESU schools who are funded through consolidated federal grants. There's some instability in terms of what kind of funding level will we have coming out of the federal government. So we're uncertain yet what kind of impact we'll have this next year and beyond. So right now we're just focusing on next year. So we've tried to be really strategic. You know, we know how many staff members we have working under that grant this year. We, on the other side, in the other district, we took some of those positions and those have been moved into their local budgets. So you know how your increase in high school tuition hurt you? That increase in tuition helped them on the other side because you're sending some of that money to them. So they have built some of those grant funded positions into their local budgets. And we have some positions where people are retiring and we're not filling. So we think that if we hold those positions open without filling for now, that we might be able to weather the first storm. But yes, and then whether or not, we look beyond that too. We've had grants from the McClure Foundation. We look for other grants. Our people are pretty savvy and dogged in terms of looking for opportunities.
And then in terms of the federal money that we're looking at, and again, unless something's changed very recently, I don't think we have a federal budget for the year that we're living in. The year that we're living in is for, I think, most of these grants, the year that would fund our next year's grants. So we don't know what that picture is going to look like. We do know that the Title II money definitely is in the crosshairs. That's about $250,000 across the SU that we get. Title I money, I haven't heard anyone looking to eliminate it, but cutting it back dramatically. That's about $1 million that we get a year. You can see the money that Heather's brought in for after-school program, total about $750,000, ultimately is federal money. And then food service is well over $1 million, and there's potentially some changes there as well. So.
Sorry, and if this is not the right time to ask, table it. But with the talks about the Department of Education going away, with the grants, like grants are they? That comes separately, right? The Department of Education, what does that fund besides the lunch program?
So currently that's where the grants come through.
Okay, so the Department of Education funds the grants.
The money goes through the Department of Education. And it's really hard to predict where anything on the federal level is going anymore. But In theory, they could get rid of the Department of Education and say, we're gonna push the food service grant through USDA and we'll still push some other little grants through another agency. My guess is that that's not their intention, but we haven't had a Department of Education forever and we've had some funding coming through. And the other funding piece that I forgot to mention, based on your question, is special ed money, the IDEA grant we get, which is another $750,000 that's potentially in here. The last article that you'll be entertaining on town meeting day is whether or not the district can establish a tuition reserve fund. This does not come with a dollar amount, so voting yes or no on this will not change your tax rate at all. What we are seeing, especially this year, with that almost $1 million increase in tuition, is that it would be nice to have a mechanism so where we have a year where we haven't spent as much money, or we predicted we're gonna have a lot of tuition kids and those families moved out, or they went to a school where they had a resident parent and we didn't have to pay tuition for them. Or we'd have that money left over, we'd be able to take that and put it into the reserve fund, and then when we have that big 8th grade class coming in the future, a small 12th grade class leaving, we could plan to take some of that money back out and not put it all in that $1 million figure that you're seeing this year.
So I promised we'd talk a little bit about the governor's proposal for education reform. So I want to start by saying, this is a proposal, this is not something that's been approved by the legislature yet. So these are the ideas that have been presented by the governor, by the Secretary of Education. Right now, there are several committees in both the House and the Senate that are trying to understand their ideas. It's lacking detail right now. There's no bill, unless nothing today. There's no bill yet that's been put in front of the legislators. So right now it's about a big idea. So what you see here is what our public education system in Vermont currently looks like. So we are way up here by the northern border. This is 52 supervisory unions or supervisory districts. So FNESU is the supervisory union that we represent. 119 districts, so we've got NMV and ER, those are districts. 287 schools educating 83,733 students. So right now, each of those distinct shapes has its own superintendent, central office, school board, it's its own entity, okay? So under the governor's proposed plan, he would shift this into 5 districts across the state. So this dark green represents the Champlain Valley region. He has the Northeast region, the Winooski Valley region, the Southwest region, and the Southeast region. So these regions were chosen because there's a construct that exists for the Vermont Superintendents Association. And that construct was really to look at the state and determine how do we sort these superintendents and decide which regional group meetings they should go to. So that's how these regions were developed. So this just means that when I have my monthly superintendent meeting, I go to the Champlain Valley region. So that was something that they chose to kind of grab onto and say, let's look at that structure and make this 5-district proposal. So we would be in the largest district in the state under this proposal. There would be about 35,000 students from Richford to Shoreham. So there's quite an expanse of our state. We would be almost 3 times as large as some of the other districts, and about double one of them. So a little more than double one of them. So pretty big shift in terms of governance. We would have 5 school boards in the state. Those school board members would be quasi-professional positions is how they're describing them. Those school boards would be elected within that district. I don't know what they mean by quasi-professional other than they would receive a salary. I can tell you that we have John Jejic here, your Berkshire board member, Mary Niles, who's here, our board chair from Montgomery, and they volunteer. They get a very small stipend in the amount of meetings we have. They probably lose money, truthfully, over the course of a year. But so you'd have those 5 boards, you'd have 5 central offices, so there'd be 5 total superintendents for the state of Vermont. So in the governor's plan, they have a timeline, right? So they're looking at this through the lens of what they're trying to do is look at a funding formula. So when you ask that question about does the state have a final approval? So in our current system, no, they just have to write whatever check gets approved for the total amount. Under this system, they would look at, here are all the schools we have. They proposed a foundation funding formula where they would look at every student in the state and say, they're trying to get to kind of Jared's point to what's an adequate amount of funding for all students in Vermont. So right now, the amount that they put out there is $13,400. And then there would be some calculation for weights. It's a little different than the weights that we currently have, but that's how they would do it. So they'd be looking at the foundation formula, they'd be looking at the governance, so fewer central offices, fewer school boards, and then ultimately they would be looking at how many schools you operate in the state. There's been some mixed message about that, whether that within their plan that they would close schools or if they're going to create the conditions under this plan to have local districts kind of be forced to close schools because there may not be enough money to operate all of the schools and meet the expectations around class sizes and other metrics. So this timeline is pretty quick, and I'm gonna let Morgan jump in and talk through the timeline.
Sure. So this is the current year that we're in. The big movement now is in the legislature, interpreting the governor's plan, and anything that happens ultimately will have to come out of the legislature, signed by the governor. FY26, this is the year for the budgets that we're discussing tonight. The governor has offered to put a chunk of money into the ed fund, basically to buy down tax rates and have the overall increase come to a 0. That wouldn't necessarily translate to every town, every taxpayer doesn't pay anything new, but statewide taxes would stay level. That also has to go through the legislation. There's also this early transition planning where the AOE is going to start doing some of the rule writing and start establishing those guidelines of what they think an appropriate class sizes or an appropriate school size is. Change starts to happen in FY27, so we would elect school board members in November. I've actually seen November of this year. They would start to build the first budget, and then we would start to close out those other school districts. July 1, 2027, that new district or those 5 new districts would take over. So you would have, a new superintendent in charge of, in our district, those 100+ schools, and we would be at that completely new funding formula. To go back to here in 2027, we would not have to vote on the budget, but the state would tell us how much money we could spend, and it would be somehow tied to the amount of money we approve this year.
So we'd have no control over our local schools or?
We would have no control over how much we spend on our local schools. We would still,
Yeah,
in
but
theory, be able to decide where we spend it.
There's a superintendent over the Burlington school districts and out here, who's gonna get the more attention? It's scary.
So that's in this FY27, new district, new funding formula. They've put out this idea of school advisory councils, which I've not paid as much attention to as I should,
I
but
put that one. The school advisory council is something that each school would be required to have. They really wouldn't have much authority at all, other than to make a recommendation to the larger board, here are the priorities we think we have for our school, and that would be taken into consideration during budget building. And the one thing that they would have the responsibility to do would be to sign off on the continuous improvement plan, which is a federal requirement for all of our buildings.
federal requirement for the moment.
Yes.
And then July 2028 and beyond, they're calling it rescale the school portfolio, which is code word for closing some schools. And then these rules that the AOE would be working on in the 2 years prior would then be used to evaluate the districts and the schools. It's easy to get class sizes and school sizes.
So this is not done yet. All of these elements have to go through the legislative session. They're being debated every single day, but everything that I'm watching, people are agreeing like, where are the details about this plan? The details just aren't there yet. So what I do sense from obviously the governor's office, and I sense it from the committees in the House and the Senate, is everybody's on board with something needs to change. There were 33 schools that voted down their budget last March, and that message that people were trying to send to Montpelier, that landed. So they are sensing we've got to do something really different. So I predict, and I think Morgan and I agree on this, we will see a different funding structure. We'll see a totally new funding model. I predict we will have far fewer supervisory unions. I don't personally think it'll end at 5. I think it'll be somewhere between 5 and what we have now. There are all kinds of ideas that are being thrown out there. I think we will have far fewer schools and much stricter standards about our staffing levels and class sizes. Anything that you would add to that?
No, I would just say, as I said in Richford last night, don't panic, but pay attention. This is moving very fast, and everything that the legislature does is publicly available on the legislature website. Pay attention to that.
Will
And
it come
is
to a,
important to note too that this isn't something that they've just pulled out of thin air. They've looked at other states, they've done a lot of research into stuff, and this is where it's coming from, is what can we change, and they're looking at other places.
will we get
Vermont
to
is-
vote on it, or is it
I'm
just?
gonna just add to that. Vermont has a really unique way of funding education. No one else in the country looks like ours, so it's really challenging for us to stand up here and say to you all, this is what this means when we're presenting the budget, because it's so complicated. It's hard to really break it down in a way that's understandable because it's just too complex. So you're right, like, it's the piece about affordability, everybody's trying to look at that. The foundation formula is very common in other parts of the state, but it's all in the details because they all do it differently. So they're trying to do this in a way that will improve, what they're talking about is improving outcomes for students. And what I will say from my vantage point is I want to make sure that we're looking at this through the lens of making sure that students in communities like ours are not disadvantaged by those shifts. So Morgan and I are very active at the state level, and those are things that we will advocate for, is to make sure that, you know, our voice is heard around making sure that we have marketable opportunities for our kids. And I know that, how about we go here, there, and then here?
I was just wondering if there was any indication of how they would do the funding. Do they have any
So, yeah,
impacts? I mean,
they are looking at what's called a foundation formula, which is something that probably 46, 47 other states do. And what they do is the legislature will say, look at your student population and say, based on these kids, we're gonna send you this many dollars per kid. And you have to figure that out. What is still floating out there is if there's a community that says, you know, that big monster Chittenden County district gets, let's say, $1 billion, and they want to spend more, how do they do that? Can they go to the voters somehow and raise some other taxes to get that? We don't know that. We also don't know how that changes with time. So if they're saying now $13,400 per kid, is it gonna stay there forever? When times are tough, is the legislature gonna cut that down? Are we gonna inflate it as time goes on? But it's basically, instead of moving from the voters saying we wanna spend this much, it's the state saying, based on your kids, you get to spend this much.
Have you thought about, like, if this is kind of the direction they're headed, have you thought about trying to do that within our district? To the class size, I mean, to a certain extent, so like, if there's a really small class at one school, and there's a medium-sized class at like, say, between Berkshire and Bakersfield, could we combine the 4th grade class into one classroom, and then save on all of those costs for not having a teacher and the parent and everyone else that's associated with that classroom?
We're definitely looking at scale, and we're looking at class size, and we're looking at staffing levels, but when we merged in our articles of agreement, the articles of agreement were written so that, I believe this was 2/3 of the communities would have to vote to approve changing any grade configuration in our schools, so we couldn't not operate 4th grade in Berkshire unless all of our communities passed that by vote, which I think would be unlikely. But what we are doing, Gavin can attest, I'm pushing on principals to say, you know, it's very difficult when you only have one 4th grade in a building. So we're doing things like, okay, we're taking these 2 classes and bringing them together, or we're taking these 2 classes and dividing into 3, or these 3 classes and dividing them into 2, depending on what the math is. So more conversations are happening with that than have ever happened before, but we can't quite get there yet. And I think that what we may see is a shift to looking at, instead of looking at these pre-K 8 schools, one of the things that you could see come out of this is they might encourage schools to look at different models, like a regional middle school, or look at like, this is gonna be a pre-K through 2nd grade campus and a 3 through 5 campus, and then put multiple towns there. So you can get to scale if you're offering the same grade levels, because you might currently have 4 of each of those. But if you put them all together, you might be able to do it with 3.
Split up the kids too, because, you know, having kids in the school district, it's really hard when they're with the same kids for 8 years. And, you know, that type of consolidation will assist with kind of mixing and interaction.
Did you have a question?
I just wanted to know if the governor's plan goes to a vote or if they just get to decide.
The legislature gets to vote on it. So you have representatives that represent each of our communities, so you have the ability to watch those legislative sessions, reach out to your legislators and let them know what you're thinking about this.
So I guess hypothetically, with their last merger, where Berkshire now shares the cost and Shelton improvements, Montgomery vice versa. And this much larger one, could Berkshire voters potentially be on the hook for the bond in Burlington and building a new school?
So you know what, in fact, you already are.
Yeah, I think the whole state is there.
See, the whole state is, because every time one of those big projects happens, we talked about, you tell the state how much money you need to pull together, and that's how that yield gets set. So every time one of those huge projects gets approved, that goes into that number, and our yield gets adjusted by that, so your tax rates are impacted already. But there's no details yet, but I would assume, Jared, that you would assume collective debt and collective assets within each of those districts.
What's the last price tag?
Say that
What
again?
was the last price on that? 280, 400?
That's on what?
Oh, that's Burlington.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
It's about 260.
Morgan, I have just a quick clarification. Can you speak to the fact that while people see this $25 million figure on the warning for the budget, that that's not, and then our tax rate gets set, that not a fraction of that is what's borne from taxpayers in the 4 towns of the community. The bulk of that 25 million comes from the state education fund. I just didn't want people to have the impression that these 4 small rural communities with a lot of people living in poverty are raising that 25 million. It doesn't mean that that's not onerous, the taxes that we have to pay, because it is for many, and we always try to kind of find that balance between opportunities for our students, paying staff good wages and good retention, salaries that make people want to stay, salaries that attract new people to work for us, and also being really mindful of the burden of taxes, which is part of this system that is somewhat fundamentally kind of needing serious, deep systemic change that now they're trying to address at the state level.
Sure. And the details are on our website on that. There's a sheet that shows for FY25, the education fund, which is roughly a third comes from residential property tax, a third comes from non-residential property tax, and a third comes from other sources like rooms and meals tax, sales tax, tax, lottery, Medicaid, et cetera, et cetera. So you can kind of break that out by district and look at the money that comes into our district and say, okay, how much of that is raised by homestead tax in Bakersfield, in Berkshire, Montgomery, and Sheldon, and somewhere else in the state. And then same for non-residential taxes, we have that. We are definitely a district, and same in municipal Richford, where we are getting more money coming in homestead property tax than we're paying. Getting more money in terms of non-homestead property tax than we're paying. And that's because there are places with much bigger grand lists, much bigger property wealth, maybe smaller schools or some relatively smaller schools, smaller school budgets, and they're putting more money into the system than they're getting back. So that breakdown is on the website. I want to say that, in each of those property tax categories, we're probably a little over half of that is raised within our towns, and almost half is increased somewhere else.
Any other questions? Jerry?
Curiosity. Much like the town report where we see line item,
Can you say
transparent, much like the town does. For transparency, we see line item, how much fuel is costing us, how much office equipment,
Yeah,
truck repairs.
we put that on our website, so it's in
Do
greater
you see
detail.
line items of individual programs that were?
You can say, you can go and look and see why, come and ask me why we're spending $1 more on workers' comp for this winter.
I mean, individual programs that we were using in this district.
Yeah,
Like, for example, it's mentioned throughout on the website also, the wayfinding program. All we know from FSU staff members is that it's a very expensive program. But as a
Yeah.
taxpayer, we don't exactly know what that means. So
Right.
how much a program like that costs the taxpayers?
yeah, we don't have anything that goes to that level of detail. You will see by school, by section, so direct instruction versus library versus guidance versus nurse. And then within that, how much is salaries, how much is health insurance, how much is dental insurance, how much is workers' comp.
Or last year's.
And that's 30 pages at that point.
From last year's annual report, we saw that a bunch of positions that were formerly federal funding, COVID money, were rolled into the general budget. But how much was it actually cost taxpayers to roll into the general budget? Some of these programs.
Are you talking about tax rate, or are you talking about?
No, the actual individual programs or positions that were paid as taxpayers.
So I think that was all in last year's budget, it was divided out what was added in.
I think so, but look at what we have on the website in terms of the current budget, and if it's not there, reach out.
Do you know offhand if there's any other states in the United States that have really large supervisory unions like they're proposing? I just looked around in England and I didn't see anything like that.
It's pretty random, but like Hawaii has one school district.
Oh,
South Dakota maybe has one school district.
I actually have, I just got to participate in a national cohort that was funded through the Gates Foundation, and several of the people that I was partnered with are serving districts of 50, 60, 70, or 80,000 students. So in some of the southern parts of the country, that is very common to have very large districts. But I would say the difference is in, definitely not North Dakota and Hawaii, but in those states, they're very high population density areas like Atlanta or something like that, where you just have a lot of schools. You know, that those superintendents basically never get into schools because they have so many. But it isn't uncommon. It is, there's research that you'll hear about if you listen to the legislative testimony about what's an evidence-based ideal size. People are talking about that. Thank you for shifting that, just reminding people that Tuesday, March 4th is an important date. We hope people will go out and vote on the school budget. This is each town here in Berkshire. You go out of your town office, the polls open at 10 and close at 7. And if you're interested in early voting, that's open now, so you could go see Emily. Or you might, I don't know time-wise, if you could still give her a call and have her mail it to you. I don't know what the deadline is for that, but you could talk to Emily about that and you could vote now. I would just ask, there's a lot going on, as Morgan said, pay attention to those pieces, and we'll try to communicate that as we get more details. It's a little hard right now because they're just ideas. Also, if you could, if people are talking about the budget, encourage them to look at their annual report, go to our website, watch the video from this, or we have 2 more meetings on the M&V side, as I said, Monday in Sheldon and Tuesday in Montgomery. So thank you all for coming and staying through the budget part.
Thank you.
Yeah.